that drive outwards is this process of our energies inside of our body kind of leaking out into the world and seeking connections outside of ourselves, where Brahmacharya is saying, no. You can pull that inwards, then from being aware and having these specific practices, that energy being pulled inwards can then be turned into this golden nectar that can then sustain ourselves. The Yoga Connection with Zorananda is a deep dive into the world of yoga, exploring the rich history of tradition, methodology, and practices both ancient and modern. Follow along as yoga is explored through solo episodes to guest interviews to understand its vast reach around the world. Hello and welcome to the Yoga Connection. My name is Zorananda. Today we are diving into the fifth yama in this Ashtanga yoga series that I've been doing. And this one, in my opinion, and from what I understand of the yoga world, is the most challenging to fully adopt and implement in the yamas themselves. And this one is Brahmacharya. The reason why it's so difficult to adopt and so difficult to go into, because traditionally and controversially, it has to do with celibacy and abstaining from sexual activity. Especially being a Westerner and coming from a world that celebrates more overt sexuality, especially in our modern age. If you were to look back over the last 200 years to now, we've definitely gone into being much more open sexually as a society than, say, we were maybe 200 years ago, where I think people being overtly sexual was still there, but it's obviously much more open. If you go onto social media, you go onto Instagram and Facebook, there's a lot of conversations around sexuality, and it's easily very open as a concept and celebrated, right? So in the yoga world, when we look at Brahmacharya, which translates to and simply means moving towards Brahma, and Brahma is one of the three figureheads of universal universality, or like the makeup of the universe. You have Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. So Brahma is the creator, Vishnu is I think Vishnu is the creator, Brahma is the maintainer, Shiva is the destroyer. I think I might be mixing up Brahma and Vishnu. But anyways, this moving towards Brahma is the kind of intention around what Brahmacharya encourages. And so one part of Brahmacharya is celibacy. So if you were to look at yoga as a practice in a more traditional sense of, like, say, the Vedic scriptures, where yoga not as a physical practice or even like a breathing or meditation practice, but yoga as a philosophy of unification. So when you look at the word yog, it's derives from and kind of translates to yoke, and to like basically blend into or to pull out of. And so in like more of the kind of Vedic understanding of yoga concerning the Brahmins and Brahma and Brahmacharya, that the dedication to the path of unifying yourself with something greater than yourself. So unifying yourself into a state of samadhi, into nirvana, whatever you want to call it, into enlightenment, that being celibate was very important to that class of people. And largely because, just like if you were to have like a Christian monk or whatever religion, that the person who's dedicating themselves to the religion or to the practice, that you are not participating in the material world. You're not participating in the normal day-to-day living where procreation is necessary. So on the like kind of buildup of the tribe, the buildup of society and the populace, to maintain the growth of your people, obviously you need to procreate. Obviously you need to have children, you need to have a wife, you need to have a husband, you want to build up a family. And so Brahmacharya traditionally is set for the Brahmins and set for, say, the monks or the ascetics who are not participating in having a family or really participating in society. So then Brahmacharya, as an aspect of the yamas, which is integrated into all the other ones that I've spoken about. So ahimsa, non-harm, satya, truthfulness, asteya, non-stealing, and aparigraha, non-grasping. Then you have Brahmacharya, celibacy, but moving towards Brahman, and also this act of devotion and dedication to the control of your inner energies. So that's kind of the direction that I'm wanting to go here. Not so much on the celibacy side, because that's obvious, you know, like there's only so much I can talk about just like not going out and having sex. And I can go in that direction a little bit of like what it means to make a decision where, okay, I'm not going to masturbate. I'm not going to have sex. I'm going to control my, my urges, whether you're male or female, it doesn't matter. It's as an individual, you're deciding that I'm not going to participate in that action. And so then what does it mean to not participate in that action internally, and why is it important? This is where it gets kind of controversial because, you know, in my just experience of going to different yoga schools, I kind of heard the same thing and this kind of rhetoric and this idea that, you know, especially, okay, if you're a man and you are not ejaculating, you're not masturbating, you're not having sex, you're keeping those vital fluids inside your body, that there's this idea that you can basically absorb that into your body. And this is where it gets kind of controversial because there's really no evidence for that. And if you look into like the Tantra community, go on to any Tantra forum, go on to like any YouTube video where you have a tantric man, quote unquote, talking about, what's it called? Seminal retention, right? Where you're like retaining your semen, that they'll talk about how you can basically pull it out from your testicles into your sacrum and your spine, and you can kind of create this concoction of fluid and hormones, and you can pull that up your spine and basically like circulate it through your body. And that sounds impressive. Like that's pretty wild too, you know? And I've heard these stories. I've spoken to tantric men who talk about this stuff. Like I have friends who proclaim that they do this stuff. But I'm on the fence of agreeing to that and also being skeptical, because there's really no proof of it. It's not like there's anybody who's ever, like gone to a scientist or gone to a lab and had this tested and they were able to see this through whatever, like MRI scans or ultrasounds. Like, I don't even know how they would do it. But that action and that is kind of in the literature of yoga. And it's not so specific in the sense that, if you were to read the Hatha Yoga Pradipika or whatever yoga book, say from, that's kind of come out of, the 18th, 19th centuries, and even older, that they're not going to specifically say that, but there's something called Amrita. And I did talk about this, I think, in another video, or another podcast episode, or it might be a YouTube video that I put up. So I'll put it in the link, because I put up a YouTube video of this practice that I called Amrita Kriya. And so there is this literature in yoga about this golden nectar, or this golden fluid, that basically pools in your sacrum and can be brought up into your brain, and where it creates this mixture of this golden fluid that then drips from your pineal gland down the back of your throat. And apparently this Amrita golden nectar is supposed to be this perfect food, and that the yogis who are successful in doing this no longer need to eat food. They no longer need to drink anything, and they basically can sustain themselves from this golden nectar. And it's pretty wild, right? Like, it's a pretty bold claim to say, well, we have this stuff in us that we can utilize, and essentially we can be completely self-sufficient as a walking, breathing thing, that we don't need to eat food or need to drink anything. And how, Brahmacharya is kind of a part of this, where you are controlling your inner energies to such a degree that those inner energies sustain you, and you don't need to seek out into the world to then sustain yourself, right? If that's like through all the desires and the pleasures that we have, at our fingertips in our life, if it's through entertainment, if it's through food, if it's through sex, you name it, that drive outwards is this process of our energies inside of our body kind of leaking out into the world and seeking connections outside of ourselves, where Brahmacharya is saying, no, you can pull that inwards. Then from being aware and having these specific practices, that energy being pulled inwards can then be turned into this golden nectar that can then sustain ourselves. So the reason why I'm saying this is because there is an actual example of an 80-year-old yogi who proclaimed to do this. So on YouTube, there is a documentary called The Buddha Boy. And it is about this like 16-year-old boy out of, I think, Nepal, who advanced himself very quickly and very profoundly through all these Buddhist teachings, and that he ended up advancing to a point where he was able to do these really extreme advanced Buddhist meditation techniques that like the elders of Buddhists were kind of at and on a level, and yet the 16-year-old boy was able to do these crazy things. And so where this Buddha boy was led to was to a point where he proclaimed that he was going to meditate in the hollow of this tree in his village near his house for 6 months without eating or drinking anything. And so this like team of British journalists and researchers caught wind of this. They went to Nepal and they filmed it. And so they got the permission of this Buddha boy's brother who was looking after him. And they're like, well, we want to prove that this is real. So can we just set up a camera and watch him for, like 3 days or something? And so with a lot of hesitation, eventually the brother was like, okay, you know what? You can set up the camera and watch. So set up the camera, and legit, this boy sat under this tree. Apparently he had already sat there for 6 months unmoving, and they were filming, and what they caught on film was actually pretty wild. So he's sitting under this tree. Suddenly he starts to sweat profusely. And this is like not at a time where it's super hot, like it's relatively cool at that time, and it was at night. He starts profusely sweating. Then there's a fire that bursts underneath him, and they quickly had to and at this point I think they were filming for 24 hours, and they rushed to go save him. The guy's brother came out and was like, no, you have to get out of here, and the kid just disappeared. So these researchers were like, well, I don't know if we actually kind of got conclusive evidence, but we filmed him for over 24 hours. This is super weird. He just was able to control his sweat glands. He would just profusely sweat and then shut it off, and then he caught on fire and then disappeared. And so one of the villagers were like, hey, I know of this Indian yogi who says that he hasn't eaten or drinking anything for over 70 years. And they're like, okay, well, that's pretty wild. So they go to the town, they go into India, they go to the town where this man is, and they meet this Indian yogi mystic. And he's like, yeah, I haven't eaten anything since I was 12 years old. And he starts to explain what he learned and what he had to do to essentially get to this point where he is completely free of any physical sustenance. And what he told them was that at the age of 8 years old, he was learning a mudra called Kachari mudra. And so essentially what that is you take your tongue and you stick it in the back of your throat. But in order to do it properly and successfully, you have to cut the fat lining on the underneath your tongue. And he said what they do is at 8 years old, they would take a hot razor blade and they would slice it a little bit at a time. And he said it takes like weeks, it took them weeks, because they would do a little bit and let it heal, and then do a little bit, let it heal, to the point where the fat lining is cut so much under the tongue where he can take the tongue and stick it in the back of his throat, up his nasal passage, right to where the pineal gland is. So if you were to look at a cross section of your skull, so if you were to kind of Google, pineal gland, cross section of skull, pineal gland, right where your throat comes up to your nasal passage, there's no bone there. So there's just tissue, and right on the other side of the tissue is right where your pineal gland is. And so this Indian yogi was like, I can stick my tongue up back of my throat, up my nasal passage, and I can press on my pineal gland. And he was saying, he's like, I do this specific meditation and I do these specific techniques. Then I basically bring my tongue up my nasal passage through the back of my throat, and I press on my pineal gland, and this liquid is poured onto my tongue, and it feeds me. And he said, not only that, when I'm in my meditation and when I'm doing this, I see this goddess come to me with a jug and pours this golden fluid down into, like, it. She's the one like pouring the liquid, and then this gland releases the liquid and it gets absorbed into the tongue. And he's like, and that's what I eat. Crazy. That's a crazy story, right? So the British researchers and the journalists are like, well, can we put you into a hospital and monitor you for a week? He says, sure. And this is all on video. You can literally, I'll have the link in the description, the Buddha Boy. You can watch it for yourself. It is wild. So they take the man, they bring him into the hospital, and he's in a glass room, and they have all these doctors monitoring him, and they keep him there for a week. He doesn't defecate, he doesn't urinate, he doesn't eat a thing. They do x-rays on him daily, and they basically show that all of his organs are basically shut down. Like, they're like shriveled up. They're like, we don't know how this guy's alive. Like, this guy doesn't have any working organs. And yet he's still perfectly healthy. All of his vitals are healthy. All of his blood work is healthy. They're like baffled. And so they keep him in the hospital for a week, and they are monitoring him 24 hours a day. And they just see him doing his sadhana practice, doing his meditation. And they show him like seated in meditation and what would look like he's swallowing his tongue and lifting it up. And he was like, yeah, I just would do my meditations and I get the food from myself. And so that to me is like really the first real world instance of someone in the traditional yogic lineage who is successfully doing these practices to have this Amrita created, or have this Amrita utilized in his body. And so where Brahmacharya comes into play is this control of your inner energies. And so that you're not at the whim of your desires, right? Because I'm sure if this man, this like elderly yogi, were to actually eat food, he would probably die. Like it would just wreak havoc to his system. Like his digestive system is just no longer operating. And that's the baffling part. Like, how is that possible? How is it possible that you can shut down your digestive system completely and it doesn't deteriorate, it doesn't decompose? Like from what they said in the video, it's like it's just dried up, you know? It's just all shriveled up. Like everything's just kind of shriveled up. There's no blood flow to it. He has normal blood flow everywhere else, but it's just not to his digestive system. So in our world as Westerners, the idea of having that much control is completely baffling, right? Because from the moment we're born to our adulthood, we're conditioned to live in a world where eating 3 meals a day is absolutely necessary, right? Like, if you live in Canada or United States, we have our like food pyramids, like government regulated food pyramids, and they have all the foods that are suggested for us to eat to maintain our body. And we believe that. We wholeheartedly believe that. And we think to ourselves, like, I almost like can't function without food. Like, we get quote unquote hangry if, you know, we go a few hours without eating, and suddenly we have to deal with people, we have to deal with their life, and it's just like we can't even deal with anything because we need to eat. But then there's this guy who hasn't eaten food for 70 years, and that's just thinking about that and hearing that, it's so hard to believe, right? There's just something in our brain that's like, no, that's not possible. And it's because in that moment, we immediately think, what would our life be without food? Especially because we have our favorite foods and we actually have like an addiction to food. Pretty much, I would say everybody has some kind of addiction to food. If it's sugar, if it's whatever type of food it is, right? Especially mainly sugar. Sugar is super addictive. And so when we're looking at the vices in our life and the action that would need to be taken to have control over those vices, there's something in us that prevents us from fully enacting the kind of self-control so that those vices aren't perpetually in our lives and potentially causing harm, right? Because, think about the food industry and all the kind of poisons that we're finding out that are just in our day-to-day packaged foods. And we start to wonder, like, well, yeah, we start to make sense that, people are getting all kinds of cancer, colon cancer, stomach cancer, cancer in any kind of organ, like that a lot of their high processed foods have substances in them that our body just cannot process. And yet, because of the addictions that we have and our obsession with the foods that we eat, we just can't help but continue eating those things and not having the self-control and the control of our energies to be like, you know what, these things no longer go in my body. And so this Indian yogi has taken it to such an extreme that nothing goes in his body. Not a single drop of water, not a single drop of food. And like, imagine that too. We're even told like, okay, if you don't eat food, you'll become so malnourished after like 4 weeks or 3 weeks that you'll just like die of hunger. If you don't drink water, you can die of dehydration after 3 days or 4 days. And this is a guy who hasn't eaten or drinking anything for 70 years, right? And it's like documented. Like, that's the crazy thing. Like, this isn't just me talking about hearsay of some story that maybe I read in an article. This is an actual documentary that was filmed, and that guy was monitored, and for a week they looked at all of his vitals and nothing changed, right? And they're like, he didn't defecate, he didn't urinate, he didn't eat a single thing. So what do you say to that, right? The point for me in looking at all that is like, okay, obviously we won't and just don't have the opportunity to live like that. Like, at what point are you going to decide in your life, okay, I'm going to start cutting the fat lining on my tongue so I can swallow it and bring it up to the roof of my mouth, and then start doing these crazy chants and meditations and have a goddess like come to me and pour golden nectar, and so that like my pineal gland releases this fluid, and then that's my food. Because like the guy even says that like, oh, there are these like specific proteins and like minerals in the fluid that's what sustains him, right? And how would he know this? But I think that's like the mystery of all this. But obviously we're not going to go to that extreme, but can we utilize it still? And the answer is yes. That the degree of which we take on these practices and the kind of effects that they're going to have are going to show benefits to some degree. Where, no, you don't need to cut your tongue and swallow it, but you can still stimulate towards your pineal gland, even if you take your tongue and you bring it to the cross section between your hard palate and your soft palate, and you kind of massage in that area, that there's a grouping of nerves that actually connect to the pineal gland, and that it's going to be less impactful but it's still going to have an effect where you can still stimulate your pineal gland in that way. And it's just going to take longer, and it's just going to be kind of gentler than if you could actually put your tongue all the way back and swallow it. And so there's still something that you can do to initiate this kind of experience of activating your pineal gland in that way. And does that mean that you just like suddenly are not going to eat anymore? Not necessarily. But I think over time, you might start to notice changes in your body. You might start to notice changes in your like appetite, and changes in like the addictive quality of the foods, where you start to think to yourself, oh, I'm starting to have this greater sense of control, and it's just almost as innate. And so your attitude towards the things that you eat are slowly going to change, because you are shifting the way that you're starting to think about and the way that you behave just by adapting to this kind of meditation and this kind of experience. And so, again, it's hard to substantiate some of these things, except for watching that documentary, because it's actual physical proof and fact, and it's something that you can see and witness. But when you do the techniques yourself, it becomes a subjective experience. And that's the important thing to note here, is that when I look at my experiences of doing these techniques, because, I've spent the last 15 years being a yogi, and I've done a lot of this work. I've done a lot of the internal chanting and, using my tongue to stimulate my pineal gland in that way. Like, I can't necessarily like bring my tongue all the way back and up, because I've never done that, like cutting of the fat lining, but I have enough subjective experience that is anecdotal, and to me is more important for me to know and to understand that I've had these experiences than it is to try to prove to people like, I've done these meditations and these chantings, and, I had this yoga master come to me and, bestow upon me certain experiences. That's just for my own experience, and so when I have these kind of conversations and I talk about these kind of subjects, I want to iterate them in a way which can be digestible. And so that if you were to want to take on a more in-depth yoga practice where it starts to move away from just the asana and the pranayama, and so like the movement and the breath work, where you're like, you know what, I want to go deeper in understanding what all this yoga stuff is, and what these yoga philosophies are, looking at Ashtanga yoga is a good step, because there's so much information there, and it can start to really allow you to examine your day-to-day living and how you operate as a human. So, say if we were to just do a little summary of the 5 or the other 4 yamas, ahimsa, non-harm. How are you dedicating yourself to being less harmful in your life? Physically harmful, verbally harmful, mentally harmful, emotionally harmful. And then satya, how are you more truthful? Do you lie to yourself? Do you lie to others? Do you tell white lies to get yourself out of like trouble and situations? Then to Ashteya, like, in what way are you stealing? Are you actually stealing physical things? Are you stealing time? Are you stealing energy? And then a parigraha, like, how are you being more at ease with things? Like, are you super attached and graspy? Are you attached to ideologies? Are you attached to behaviors? Are you attached to materialism and your personality and your identity with things. And so that all leads to then Brahmacharya is okay, in order for all those other four to be successful in your day-to-day life, where then you can successfully say, like, yes, I am less harmful. Yes, I don't steal. Yes, I am truthful. Yes, I am more at ease with things, and I'm not so graspy and I'm not so attached to things. All comes down to how you control your inner energies. And, one of the first steps then is through celibacy, right? If you can control those sexual urges and you see that energy inside of you is actually a creative force, like literally a creative force. When you procreate with another person, you are literally creating life. So there's a lot of power in that. There's a lot of responsibility. And so if you can see that, okay, well, this power is in me to create life and to procreate. So then how can I take that energy within me? If I'm not going to create life, if I'm not going to create another human, can I use that energy to create something of importance for myself and others that represent something greater than myself? And that's essentially what moving closer to Brahma means, is that you are taking that energy within yourself and you are moving it into a place that it moves it closer towards this greater sense of yourself, your higher self, or God, or whoever you want to call it, divinity, Brahma. And you are then creating this experience of abundance that if you were to just be at the whim of your desires and your passions and your vices and your addictions, that you wouldn't have that experience of something greater than yourself. And that greater than yourself could be, you're an artist and you want to make the most beautiful art that anyone's ever seen. But instead of like actually sitting down and working on a painting for 8 hours or 10 hours or for 2 weeks or for a month, you go and party all the time. And it's like, well, how are you supposed to make this amazing, beautiful art if you're not controlling the energy that goes out to making decisions? That is kind of a waste of time. So instead of being real with yourself and saying, okay, instead of like going out and spending money and partying, I'm going to stay in and work on this craft. Say if that's music, say if that's woodworking, like whatever it is that, it's writing a book, it's, whatever it is that you're like, I need to rein this in so then I can pour that energy into this thing that is going to be a representation of this connection of something greater than myself. And I think a good example like that this person does beautifully is this artist named Akiane, and she makes the most incredible art. Like, she's a painter and she just recently did one about an owl that is like this cosmic owl, that inside the owl in the painting are all these other animals. And if you look at it as a whole, you see this like amazing cosmic space owl. And then you look into it and there's like giraffes and lions and tigers and zebras. And you're just like, how do you like make something like this? And she pours hours and hours and hours into this art, and she makes a beautiful video about it. And she basically like documents her whole process and narrates it, and basically makes like a documentary of every painting. And it's amazing. And that to me is like a perfect example of this utilization of Brahmacharya. I think whether or not she even like knows it, I don't think it really matters. But in my mind and, in my observation of it, it's like, yeah, she's taking all this energy in her and all this creativity, and it's flowing out and it's creating this beautiful art. And she's like super dedicated. She has her own art gallery, and yeah, it's amazing to see. And so I think it's instances like that can be really inspiring. And I think when we are at the whim of not controlling our inner energies, and we're always being pulled into our vices and pulled into situations that, you know, we think we don't have control over, one of the byproducts is a lot of jealousy and a lot of insecurity when we start to see people who have dialed their inner energies in and they're like really focused and really dedicated, that we'll see someone like that and we'll just be critical and judgmental. And that is a product of years and years of habituating, leaking our energies out. And that's what I really like about the yoga practice is it's really it like shines a light on these qualities of ourselves, and it has just so many amazing philosophies and so many amazing stories to draw off of. And there are yogis in the world, you know, current and past, who have done a lot of good work to explain how these things work. And I was looking through the Bhagavad Gita by Yogananda because, you know, this episode has been more of like a free flow. I didn't write anything down for this one, but I did go into Yogananda's Bhagavad Gita transliteration to find some things what he says about Brahmacharya. So I did find a few things. Let me see here. Just bear with me for a moment while I kind of okay, so in what is this, verse 26 of, let's see here. I don't know what, getting back to it here. So this chapter is the historical basis and esoteric essence of yoga. Chapter 4, the supreme science of knowing God. So he says in verse 26, the verse is translated to, certain devotees offer as oblations in the fire of inner control their powers of hearing and other senses. Others offer as sacrifice in the fire of the senses, sound and other sense objects. So Yogananda says the first rite referred to in the stanza describes a symbolical fire ceremony practiced by all brahmacharis, parentheses, self-disciplinarians, by pratyahara, interiorization. The man of discipline withdraws his consciousness and life force from the auditory, optical, olfactory, gustatory, and tactual nerve centers, casting sensory perceptions into the flame of controlled inner awareness of peace. By deep meditation, samyama, self-mastery, through dharana, dhyana, samadhi, the yogi of inner self-control succeeds in freeing his mind from the tug-of-war with the five senses, and is able to dissolve all perceptions of the five senses into one indivisible perception, that of this bliss of the self. This is the state of the devotees who win the true victory in the battle between the senses and the God-aspiring mind. In the earlier stages of meditation, the five senses attempt to distract the attention of inwardly moving devotee. Imaginary and visible perceptions are presented while the devotee with closed eyes and ears is seeking perfect at oneness with the true self. So right then and there, to me, it seems pretty clear, but I think I can explain it a little bit as well, that what we know of as meditation, just generally, say if you were to get an app on your phone and you were to try this like 5-minute meditation where there's some birds chirping, there's maybe some guided meditation that's saying breathe in and breathe out, calm yourself, focus on a single point, and there's some soft music playing, that a lot of that is still within the realm of the senses and really isn't actually true meditation. So what Yogananda is saying here is that you have to utilize pratyahara to actually draw the energy from all the senses inwardly into this divine internal peacefulness that is a flame of our consciousness and awareness that then burns away the like distractions of the mind and the movement of energy through the senses. That kind of goes into a later part of Ashtanga yoga, which is pratyahara. But in this case, this is really identifying what Brahmacharya is in, coordination with pratyahara, that to really uphold Brahmacharya is to be in a state where you are actively pulling these inner energies in. And that's the hard part, because in our conditioning as humans, we're taught that we just don't have control of our bodily senses, right? That it's autonomic. And as soon as we go into the scientific realm of these things and we hear autonomic, in the world of science, it's like there's nothing that you can do about that. The body is just operating, it's unconscious, and there's nothing that you can do about it. But how our nervous system works, there's always an inverse. So just like how we have the periphery nervous system, where the nervous system goes through our limbs and goes like through our arms and legs and torso, we have the central nervous system, where then everything comes not only out through the limbs and allows us to interact with the world, it also draws in through the spine. And then we have the parasympathetic or the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So then the sympathetic nervous system is a part of the peripheral nervous system, which then allows us to actually use the energy of the peripheral nervous system to then act things out. So that's like fight, flight, or freeze. Then we have the parasympathetic nervous system, which then is the draw inward of our energies for rest and digest. So when we are going to sleep and we eventually like fall asleep and go unconscious, that is the parasympathetic nervous system acting to then draw everything in so that we can shut down our body. And so then the autonomic nervous system has its inverse, the somatic nervous system. So then we can actually use our nervous system in a somatic way to start to controlling things. And again, take this all with a grain of salt. Search up these words, look things up, and also make up your mind yourself. That's what I did, like when I looked up a lot of the new age stuff of thinking about energies, I just was not satisfied. So I looked up more scientific ways of understanding these things, and it started to make sense to me by making a bridge between the more traditional yogic terms like pratyahara and sense withdrawal, and being like, oh, okay, well, can that be developing this relationship between all the different parts of our nervous system and utilizing different practices to actually initiate drawing our energies from our peripheral nervous system into our central nervous system through the somatic nervous system. And so I'll read a little bit more. There's a couple other pages that I found stuff on Brahmacharya from Yogananda. Okay, so Yogananda says here, such evolved souls did not need to appease their sense desires before seeking God wholly. They pursued a straight and immediate path to him through a lifetime of Brahmacharya and sannyas, ignoring the formalities of the family or householder's life, the forest life, and that of a wandering ascetic. Jesus, Babaji, and many great prophets of all ages adopted only the direct, undeviating path, For them, it was unnecessary to enter the whirlpool of ordinary material life. Great souls have long since assimilated in previous lives the childish or kindergarten lessons afforded by worldly experiences. In modern life, a young person who prefers to have a family first, thinking he will seek God afterwards, is in serious error. Owing to the lack of early training in the hermitage of discipline, the man of today finds his senses and desires uncontrolled. When he enters the householder's state in the natural course of events, he becomes so overburdened with duties, maintaining a family by running after the dollar, that he usually forgets to say even a tiny prayer for God, let alone engage in a wholehearted search for him. So the thing that I disagree with Yogananda here, because he's saying, if you were going to pursue the modern, or not the modern, but like the traditional kind of like family life, that you'll abandon your seeking for God or seeking for something greater than yourself, and that you have to separate the two. So it's either you are going to take on the ascetic life and you are going to really devote yourself to connecting to God or connecting to the universe or divinity, whatever it is, and that you have to take on Brahmacharya in that sense. And it's through that devotion then you'll be able to move yourself closer towards Brahma or God. And that if you don't do that and you take on the family life, that all the responsibilities of the family life are going to burden you and you won't even have time to do those things. Maybe that was the case with the past, but I think we live in a different kind of era where the technology that we have and the advancements that we have put us in a place where we can actually do both now. And you actually see this in a lot of cases in our modern world, where if you were to go through social media, that there are people who have families and have that life, and they are devoted yogis. And it's really interesting to see. And it's something that, I think to myself as well. Obviously I don't have a family, so I can't relate in that sense. But I exist in the modern world, and I have a day job. I have my own responsibilities. And yet through all those responsibilities, there's still a part of myself that is very eager to continue pursuing a more heightened spiritual path, even though maybe I'm not doing a strong asana or a strong sadhana in the morning. That there are ways to be able to still introduce the devoted life of a yogi in your day-to-day life through contemplation and through meditation at certain times. And so I agree that the material world is going to be very distracting, and it's going to basically pull you into this life of vices and kind of wasting your energies, so to speak, on a lot of things. But I disagree that because of the advent of the internet and because of the access that we have to a lot of information, say like podcasts like this, that you can learn a lot about these things in a way quicker way than say Yogananda would have had to in like the early 1900s or mid 1900s. That we're living in an era of a quickened and accelerating learning of this kind of information. And so where you don't have to read a whole library of books in order to understand these concepts, that you can listen to a few podcasts. And there's something I think about our brains now because of the use of the internet and the use of social media, that with getting bits of information all the time really quickly, that we actually have trained ourselves to integrate and absorb information a lot quicker than say someone from the 1900s. That say if you were to bring someone from the 1900s to our world now, it would be so hard for them to be able to comprehend how fast we get information. That, at that time, say, in like the early 1900s, the only way that you're getting information is someone publishes a book that they researched stuff for decades in order to actually write that book, or they're getting information from the newspapers, and the journalists and the people publishing that stuff had to spend weeks and weeks in the field actually gathering this information. Where now it's like you open up your phone, you go on Google, you have hundreds of articles that you can read. You have thousands of books that you can actually have AI summarize. You can just be like, hey, like ChatGPT, can you summarize this book for me? And it'll give you all the key points right then and there within a few minutes. And so there's a huge difference, I think, in how we absorb information now than, say, it would have been back in his time. And so I think you can utilize these practices as a modern person in a more mundane world and still live that material life where you have a family, you have children, and you can see good examples of this. Say if you listen to Duncan Trussell, like his podcast, I think Duncan Trussell's Family Hour, that he'll have like modern kind of Western Buddhist practitioners and yogis who live a good modern life, and they are very dedicated to their practice. And, to some degree, they're enlightened, maybe not in the traditional sense that they are living in a cave and they're absorbed in, Kachari Mudra, and they have a goddess dripping golden nectar into their brain. But they have a level of awareness that is quite impressive, just considering the wisdom that they have as who they are as a person. I'm kind of getting to or here, let me see here. There was another page. Did I actually read that already? Let's see here. So I just want to read one last thing from Yogananda as he defines Brahmacharya. I think this is a good way to end, just to kind of recap. So Yogananda says, he who is steadfast in Brahmacharya is defined as a celibate student who is faithful in living a holy life, engaging in sacred study and self-discipline. In the prescribed Vedic plan, this was basically the beginning of the spiritual life of all aspirants. Brahmachari vrate has also a deeper meaning here, literally, quote, one whose sphere of action or act of devotion, vrata, is practicing chara, om, Brahma, the sacred sound, shabda, Brahman. The accomplished brahmachari, then, is one who, by the practice of meditating on Om, roams or progresses in the realm of Brahman, manifested as the creator or holy vibration, the Om, Amen, or Holy Ghost. So I think there is a good indicator of then what the practice of brahmacharya can look like. That it's not just about celibacy. It is a daily utilization of mantra. So in this case, Om. So chanting Om to yourself. There are many other mantras that you can chant that are going to help deepen this awareness. And then an internalized focus on being devoted to divinity. And so what can that look like to you? So that's my question for you. And maybe your homework is, what does your relationship or connection to divinity look like inside of you? So if you were to sit and close your eyes and internally chant Om, and while you're chanting, you start to really focus on bringing all the energy in. So really focusing on that aspect of Brahmacharya where you're pulling all the energy from the sense organs in, and you intend for yourself in that moment that all of that you're doing is to move yourself closer to Brahma, move yourself closer towards divinity, and sit there and watch and see what happens. So thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast, hearing me rant about some wicked, mystical, awesome, crazy, wild yoga stuff. I really appreciate that. As always, check out the links in the description. I have some new music out. I have a new music video out as well. I'm going to put all the links there. Check out my social media pages, particularly my Instagram pages, my yoga page, my music page, and give this podcast a like and follow. As always, have a wonderful rest of your day. Enjoy.